you so much. Thanks to everyone for taking the time to be here today. It's always really fun for me to write about or give webcasts about Excel because there was a time in my life when I was one of the many math-phobic people out there. And you know, a lot of people tell me that they don't like or feel comfortable with Excel because they're not good at or they don't like math. But as somebody who dropped pre-calculus twice in high school, might have been 3 times, kind of blocked out the memory, let me tell you, Excel is a fantastic program for card-carrying members of the Math-Phobic Society. You do not have to be good at math to be great with Excel and get a lot from it. Not only is Excel easier than you might think, whether you love math or not, but the whole point of Excel is that it actually does the math for you. And unless you are a mathematician or scientist, it probably does a better job. Now, maybe even so. Now personally, I've had some good experiences later on in grad school and such that helped me make my personal peace with math, but I'm never going to use Excel, of course, the way that a mathematician or scientist would. And you know that's okay, because the purpose of Excel is to make it easy to analyze and present data effectively, no matter what that data is, no matter what it's for. So today, we're here to look at a range of Excel tools, new tools, improved tools, existing features that you might have seen in previous versions that can help you create better workbooks with less work and just put the very best face on your facts, on your quantitative data. It's about treating your workbooks like the documents they are. But before we jump in, I want to give you a brief idea of what to expect today. Now, like my books, this webcast is not really planned for beginners. And to that end, I'm going to be making some assumption about your experience with Excel during the session. You can get an idea about some of those on this slide. But you know, if any of these aren't familiar to you, please don't be concerned. Please do stay, even if you are a beginner. If you're quite new to working with Excel, it's going to feel like I'm going pretty fast, most likely. But you know, keep in mind that, as Yaz mentioned, you can ask questions, all of which I'll answer at the end of the session. Or if there are too many to get through at the end of the session, I'll respond to you. I'll send you answers by email. I will also be giving you a way to reach me after the session is done if questions come up later. Also, as Yaz mentioned, you'll be able to come back and watch this webcast again as a recording if there's anything that you want to review again. So please be comfortable, and I hope that there's something that everyone will be able to get out of the session. But so in fact, to that point, even though I've planned this session more for users with some experience, it would help me to be able to deliver a more useful session for you today, whatever your level is, if I can just take a minute or two to learn a bit about your experience with Excel and what version of Excel you're using. So I'm going to ask you to take a couple of quick, totally anonymous polls. First of all, let's take a quick look at what version of Office you use most often right now. And if you can just go ahead and click your answer, submit your answer on screen, totally anonymous, it would be really helpful to get an idea of who's in the room in that regard. And we'll just give everybody a minute to chime in. Okay, great. It looks like the majority of folks here today are Office 2010 users, and that's great. We have some users of Office 2007. A lot of what we're going to look at are applicable to you folks. We also have some Office for Mac 2011 users, and that's super because almost all of the features that we're going to look at today are available in Excel for Mac 2011 as well. I'll point out when they're not. And for those folks who are on Office 2003 or an earlier version, you are not going to have in those versions most of what we're looking at today. But hopefully you'll get some tips as well, and it'll give you an idea of what you will get in Excel if you are looking at moving to a new version. So one other poll, let's just find out how much experience you have with Excel, if we can, and how would you describe your level of experience with Excel? Again, totally anonymous. Submit your answers. We'll just give everyone a minute to submit your answer. Really hope there's not a lot of people picking that bottom option there. Okay, super. So it looks like the majority of folks here today would rate themselves or categorize themselves as intermediate users. We do have a bunch of advanced users. We've got some beginners and basic users as well, and we've got some professionals, some Excel experts with us as well. And thank you very much. We have nobody that asked the question, what is Excel? So that's awesome. All right. And then we can go ahead and get back to business. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to do that. And so today's session is focused on Excel 2010. If you use Excel 2010, or for the Mac users in the room, if you're using Excel for Mac 2011, you've really got a lot of fantastic new and improved features. And for Mac users as well as those Windows users who collaborate with folks on Mac, it's important to point out that Excel for Mac 2011 is extraordinarily improved over the previous version in terms of cross-platform compatibility. Feel free to ask if you have specific questions about that as well. I don't want to take our time specifically for that today, but happy to answer questions about it. You know, overall, the coolest thing in my opinion about Excel is that even most features that seem at first to be about design or layout in Excel have number crunching power. It really can be just, downright amazing how easy some of these very powerful features are to use. Excel is all about logic. It's very, very black and white. So, for example, did you know that if you add a formula to one row in a new column of a table, Excel automatically adds that calculation for the entire column? Or have you seen the feature that was added in Excel 2010 and Excel for Mac 2011 with these tiny little charts called Sparklines that sit right in worksheet cells? Totally customizable, very cool. Or did you know that you can now, and since Office 2007, add multiple conditional formats to the same cell, and you can manage them, you can edit them, you can reorder them? Well, we're going to take a look at those features and an awful lot of others today, and yeah, that means the demo is going to go pretty fast because we do have a lot that I'd like to show you. So we're going to be checking out some great features of Excel tables like those calculated columns I just mentioned, data visualization tools including conditional formats and the new Sparklines feature. We're going to look at tips for working with charts that you can utilize whether your charts are in Excel, PowerPoint, or Word. Keep in mind that since charting in all three programs comes from Excel, right, they are Excel charts, whether you're in Word, Excel, or PowerPoint, as long as you have the full Office suite installed, and that is true since Office 2007. And we're also going to take a quick little 5-minute introduction to a big favorite feature of mine, one of the most incredible tools in Excel with a sadly troubling reputation. Please don't believe everything you have heard about pivot tables. If you don't already use them, they are not only easy, they are easy. If you can create a column chart, you can create a pivot table. But they are so powerful. If you use Excel to analyze data and you're not using them, you are missing out big time. So we'll take a quick look at that. Okay. That said, as we get into the demo, I'd like to mention a couple of things about the screen share. It's common for video or audio to lag with screen sharing software, and it's nearly impossible for me to know if that's happening to you. It's going to vary based on each person's internet connection, system resources, etc. So if it feels like I'm jumping around on screen, I promise I'm not going to do that to you. But keep in mind, again, just another reminder, you can ask questions if you miss something, and you can return to the recorded version of this session. You can watch the recording to review anything that you missed. Just a couple more reminders quickly. No matter when you ask your question, I'm going to answer them at the end of the session and or send you an email with an answer afterwards. There isn't always time to take all the questions live, but if you ask a question, it's going to get answered. Also going to give you an address where you can ask me questions that arise after the session is over. If you'd like to make note of that address now, it is my very neglected blog. That's arroway.net, AROUET.net. Again, AROUET.net. You'll see a click to contact link, and you can send me your questions there. And last thing to mention before I jump into the share is a shameless plug for my latest book, which is for Office 2010 and Office for Mac 2011. It's called Documents, Presentations, and Workbooks. And the reason I'm mentioning it is that if you have the book, you have some of the sample files we'll be looking at today. They are samples provided with the book, so you can try out the specific examples for yourself. And everything I covered today is also covered with far more detail in the book as well. Okay, shameless plug officially done. I'm going to go ahead and jump into the screen share, and folks, that takes just a minute to get set up, so bear with me. Okay, so we are starting out with a worksheet that is as simple can be, right? Doesn't get much more simple than blank. And the reason I'm starting from blank instead of having a little sample table here, I'm just going to create a little sample range of data and convert it to an Excel table to talk about those, is just to show you a couple of quick shortcuts that you may be familiar with, right? Some pretty familiar shortcuts if you've used Excel for a while. You have things like autofill. I want to put my 4/4. It's going to count automatically. And the same thing for regions. I can just drag. You see that little handle in the bottom right corner. I'm going to select the body of rows, and if for folks, there's those of you, for example, who are professionals or advanced users, if you ever help others and you're creating sample data, or if you're if you're creating a large worksheet, a large range of data where you need to fill in a large range of cells, one of my favorite shortcuts, and well, for sample data, this ran between function is awesome because I'm just creating a range of sample data that is values between 100 and 200. But then no matter what data, notice that I'm typing into one cell but have a bunch selected. I'm going to press Control-Enter, and that fills the whole range with whatever I've typed into that one cell. You see different numbers because that's the ran between function. That's going to create random numbers. So that puts a function into every one of these cells. And now for the purpose of sample data, I actually don't want that function because one of the things about ran between for folks interested in using it is it's going to recalculate. Anytime the worksheet calculates, the numbers will change. And that could just get in our way, be a little confusing. So I'm going to replace these formulas with just values. And so I'm going to copy. I just use Control-C on my keyboard, but of course on the Home tab you've got the clipboard group. In Excel 2010, if you click on the arrow below the Paste button, you may already be familiar with this, and you may know from many versions that Paste Special gives you a wide range of different paste types, including paste that will perform calculations when you paste. So really cool, powerful options for helping you manipulate your workbooks. I really like paste values. Nice shortcut there that you get in Excel 2010. And as what I meant to say there being that Paste Special not new, those shortcuts under the Paste button are what's new. And now, so I have this nice little data range. This isn't a table. It's not going to do anything particular. It's just a bunch of cells with numbers. I'm going to turn it into a table. Now, on the Home tab in the Styles group, I've got table styles. Well, you've got table styles in Word, and you've got table styles in PowerPoint, and table styles in Excel may look very similar. It's important to point out that table styles are separate in each of those programs, and I'll talk about table styles in just a minute, but I want to look at the table first. Tables in Excel are different. Well, they're the same in that if you notice and it looks like, folks, I failed to turn off my call waiting, so I apologize for that. That was a really poor mistake on my part. Please just ignore any beeping that you hear. And focus. So on the table styles, you see that you'll notice from these colors, this is coordinating with my theme, right, with my active theme. It happens to be the Office default theme, so probably pretty familiar to Office 2010 or even 2007 users, right? Just like table styles do in the other programs, but very separate. Tables in Excel, just like just about everything in Excel, are really powerful functional tools. So when I apply a table style, and it recognizes the contiguous data range, notice it didn't have to have it selected. It recognizes that my tables have headers, and my table has headers already, so it doesn't need to add a header row. Click OK, and there's my formatted table, things like banded rows that are automatically going to continue as that data range expands. I've got a little icon in the bottom right corner that lets me stretch or contract the size of that table. And so right now it looks just like a basic table, right? But this table is going to have some really powerful functionality. At its simplest, it by default gives me auto filter and sort capability. You've got a lot of this stuff that you may know from earlier versions, but then you have some very nice, cool functionality. Like let's say that I've gone through the data and maybe highlighted some cells or applied some cell color. Well, if I want to I can sort by color, I can filter by color. So maybe I only want to look at rows that I've highlighted. And that's quick and easy. And just very simple but very powerful function. You don't have to go looking for advanced data analysis tools to get a lot of information. Obviously, this is a super simple small table, but think about this working with a very large data set, how you can filter and sort very quickly and simply to get a lot of information from your data right there. And you can make it look good with something as simple as a table style. Before we get to making it look good, let's look at a little bit more about what tables do. So if I say that I want to add sums, right? So I want to add the year totals for these 4 quarters. I might want to start another column here, but I can click to the right of that, and I can start my function. Notice a couple of things about functions as long as we're here, right? I can, that I get this autocomplete list. Love that. And when I start the function, notice after I put the open parens there, if I get a screen tip, I can point to that function name. I'm going to get a hyperlink there. If I click on that, I get context-sensitive help. That's going to give me help about this particular function that's going to tell me what I need to fill in. Obviously, most of the people on this call are familiar with the sum function. Think about if you're using a function that you haven't used before, and you can get context-sensitive help that tells you what your arguments need to be. So that's very useful. Now, as I drag across to create this formula, notice the data that's being filled in there. Notice that it doesn't show me D9 through G9. It's showing me a different reference. It's showing me reference to pieces of the table. This is called structured references. Structured references came to be with Excel tables in 2007, and what they do, to simplify what they do, essentially they give you, they make it much easier to manage data sets. For example, if you're using a table as a data source for a chart or for a pivot table, and that data range changes, you don't have to worry about going back to it because it's not referencing cells, it's referencing the piece of the table. And so if that piece of the table becomes larger, it's still valid. We'll take a look at an example of structured references in use in just a couple of minutes. In the meantime, so I'll go ahead and press Enter, watch what happens when I do to add that formula. Excel has added what's called a calculated column. I don't really like that column name it came up with, but so I changed the column name. But notice that it's added the same function, the same formula rather, to each cell, to each row rather, in that column automatically. If I didn't want that, I moved through a little bit too fast, but you may have seen a lightning bolt that appeared to the right of the cell that I was in. That is an autocorrect option. If you click the arrow at that point, you can tell it to undo the calculated column. You can also tell it to not do that anymore if it happens to be something you don't like. Personally, I love it. It's a huge time saver, especially, again, imagine if you're working with a large data set, and it's going to add that automatically. Let's say I've got a fifth region that I want to add, or I've just started this table and I've got a ton more data to add to it. As soon as I start typing, move to the next cell, it adds a new row, it adds the formatting, and again, that's an example of my little lightning bolt, my autocorrect options, and it will let you undo that automatic functionality as well. Probably wouldn't want to undo that functionality. In most cases, it can be very handy. Notice that again, it's going to continue that. It's going to continue the calculations as well and adds them as that table continues to expand. So lots of power going on there, lots of power in something that also makes my worksheet look a lot better as well, right, than a simple data range. And notice, you'll see in preview as I move over these, notice that just like most of your content, right, your table styles, your table formatting is theme aware. So it also is going to help your worksheets, help your workbooks coordinate with all of your content across Office, right? Themes, document themes work across Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. If you're not familiar with document themes, they work. Just very briefly, document themes apply a coordinated set of fonts, colors, and graphic formatting effects to an entire document, workbook, or presentation when you click to apply, right? In PowerPoint, they also have additional functionality. They control the slide master and slide layouts. That is tremendous oversimplification, but themes are super easy to use. You can create your own and customize them. You can use them, for example, to implement your company branding across the organization. Help tremendously in make it so much easier to keep content looking consistent. An important point about that, too, if you add content or you apply a theme to a workbook and content doesn't change, it wasn't theme aware to begin with. So if you create a new document in the OpenXML file formats, the file formats that were introduced in Office 2007 and are true for both Office for Windows and Office for Mac currently, those are the ones with the 4-character file extensions, right? So XLSX or XLSM if you have macros in your file, but by default XLSX is the Excel workbook default for Office 2010 and Office 2007, as well as on Mac for 2008 and currently 2011 versions. If you're using the OpenXML file formats, by default when you create a new document, your content is going to be theme ready. But if you've converted something from an earlier version, it is not automatically theme aware. You need to apply new formatting such as a table style before you're going to see the theme aware formatting. Okay, let's talk very very briefly about a couple of quick things about table styles as promised. In Excel, just like for Office Art elements, for especially Office Art and things that you see in galleries across Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, in Office 2010 you get a lot of unique functionality available from the right click or quick access to functionality. Sometimes it's unique, sometimes it's a duplicate entry point. But if you want to create custom Excel table styles, you can do that from the bottom of the gallery, or you can duplicate an existing table style to start with that. So if I wanted to modify this one, for example, I can't modify the built-in. I can duplicate it. Gives me a dialog box, already has all the functionality in the style I picked, and then I can customize it to create my own from there. Notice I can also set it as the default so that if instead of inserting an existing table, or formatting an existing table, if I insert a new table, then it would insert with my default table style, which I didn't change. So there you go. That's the default. Okay, so there's table styles for you. The tables, of course, being an extremely simple and powerful and probably one of the most common things, because worksheet data, of course, is going to be the starting point for just about whatever you do in terms of quantitative content in Excel. But data visualization is a really important element of your workbooks and creating your workbooks as documents. And it's not just about bells and whistles. Data visualization is not about making things pretty. Sure, it doesn't hurt rather to make things pretty, but you know what? No one is ever going to buy your idea because of the color of your pie charts, ever. The idea about data visualization is to make it easier to garner the important information from your data, to make it easier to point out the important stuff you want to point out about your data. And there's some really powerful, really cool data visualization tools. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this empty row. Notice while we're here, by the way, that when you're working with tables, one thing that makes it so much easier to work with a worksheet, I should have mentioned this earlier, it's one of my favorite things about tables, is that I can insert and delete table rows without having to reconfigure the whole worksheet. Isn't that nice? Remember the days of having to add or remove rows, move all your various tables, or rather ranges on the page or on the sheet that you could make room for the change you wanted to make in a given range. You don't need to do that if you're working in tables, because you can even notice that I can select a row and notice the pointers that I'm getting. I can rearrange my rows and columns, and makes it a lot easier to work around. Okay, so let's say, for example, that I want to have a little quick visual comparison of what the numbers for these 4 quarters mean. Well, I can use this new feature called Sparklines, and Sparklines is on the Insert tab. I select the data that I want to use for my Sparklines, and notice that I'm going to create it for all 4 regions and just for those 4 quarters. And let's go ahead and maybe try a column Sparkline. It's going to ask me, I got this dialog box that recognizes the data range I selected, asks me where I want to place my Sparklines. Notice I select the same number of rows in this case that I did for my source data, right? So it matches up. It knows where to place my Sparklines. I click OK, and I've got these cool little charts. Now, I can do an awful lot with my cool little charts. For example, first of all, because I created them at the same time, notice that when I click into any, they're all selected, so I can format them all at once. That is grouping. Notice the group over here. So if you created Sparklines separately and you want to be able to format them together, you can select and group them. These are already grouped. I've got Sparkline styles. These are not customizable, as you see, but I've got a number of different choices for the styles themselves. They're customizable in a number of other ways, though, and we'll take a look at that. So if I apply a different style, and then maybe I want to show a high point differently and a low point. So the high point, maybe I want that to be green, and low point, okay, we'll make that red, and we can zoom in on this a little bit more. These are rather small. Maybe I want to change the height of the cells to show the differences a little bit more clearly. I can customize the start and end value. Notice that when I'm clicked into Sparklines, I get a Sparklines Tool Design tab. I can change the type of Sparkline. Maybe I want to show that as lines instead, and notice the markers for the high and low points that I selected there. Win and loss Sparklines, really great if maybe you're doing something like an office football pool. Those can be very handy, come in handy. I'm sure you have plenty of other examples. That was the first one that comes to mind. And you can customize the axis. You can customize things like customizing the axis just like in a regular chart to be able to to be able to expand and show that data range a little bit more dramatically if it's not showing enough differentiation. You can change the sparkline color itself. So while I can't customize the existing styles here, I can in fact create. Notice I get the theme color palette, so they are theme aware. I can pick another color. I can customize all of the various points that I want to show. And then notice here as well that you have the ability to edit data from that point as well. So essentially, simple but pretty powerful little charts that sit right in a cell. And I could, just add. Notice that when I type directly next to a column, it adds another column. So if you want that formatted as part of your table, the table would expand. We're going to undo that. Okay. So Sparklines, new feature, Excel 2010, Excel for Mac 2011, have Sparklines, and also have another very powerful data visualization tool that got a lot more powerful in 2007 by leaps and bounds than it ever was before, and is improved in the current version as well, conditional formatting. So you may remember, if you remember conditional formatting from much earlier versions, something as simple as if the value is below X, show it in red font. Very simple conditional formatting. Well, that is not today's conditional formatting. You can do that. You can absolutely do it, no problem, very simple to do. And you have some basic conditional formatting, things like highlight cells based on their values, right? Very simple, quick, and easy. You also have data visualization conditional formatting, things like data bars, another way to have the appearance of charts. I don't like the variance in those particular random numbers. Let's make this look a little easier to see. Okay, so it looks like a chart. It's not. These are data bars that show the relative values very quickly and easily. You've got color scales showing the relative color temperature, icon sets, including some new icon sets in the current version. So for example, I can use my traffic lights right there. And notice what I also did. If you use conditional formatting in much earlier versions, you may be surprised that I was able to add more than one conditional format in the same cell. What's more, I can now go to the Conditional Formatting Rules Manager, and I can look at all of the conditional formats on the sheet. I can edit the rules. I can edit the range to which the rule is applied. I can edit the order in which they're applied. I can also tell it to stop applying rules if a certain condition is true. Now that wouldn't apply in these examples, but let's use the example of turn the value red turn the text red if the value is below X. And if that's the case, do not apply anything else, right? So if the text is red, you just see it as red. If it's not, then it can get all your cool conditional formatting. So there's an awful lot you can do here that isn't just this isn't about adding color and making your workbook pretty, although it's certainly, you can customize all of these things. So if you can go into more rules or new rule, and you can customize everything, including making things like data bars coordinate with your theme colors. You can choose whether they have borders. You can make them look, you can make them very easily coordinate with the look of all of your documents. So you can help them stand out, help the data that you want stand out very easily. Let's take a look at some examples of that in action. As mentioned earlier, these example files are available as sample documents if you do have my Office 2010, my book that's for Office 2010 and Office for Mac 2011, and this is one of those. So here's some examples on this sheet of some data visualization tools. So these are, first of all, they're Excel tables, right? You see the table structure, Table Tools Design tab for features. You've got your auto filter set up. Notice we've got the use of icon sets here, data bars. Cool to notice that you can customize data bars, right? We've got them starting from the right rather than starting from the left. You've got some sparklines here, line sparklines, a single column sparkline. Oops. Right. So very easy to add impact to help your data stand out and make your workbook look better at the same time. Here's a really cool example, one of my favorite examples that I have seen. The folks at Office.com templates are doing some really great things with templates. There are some new, if you've seen templates, if you've gone to templates in the past and not thought they could help you, give it another shot and continue to give it another shot. You'll be seeing more content to come. This is one of my favorite Excel examples. You don't have to be a college student. You don't have to know a college student. This is such a great example of using Excel data visualization and using Excel tables really simply and really powerfully. Notice this budget, this thermometer chart. I'm trying to find the right zoom here, folks, because the resolution to show you on the share isn't all that easy to get everything in. So let's say I'm going to go to my monthly expenses, and okay, I made a bunch of text. So my cell phone bill was a little higher. Notice that percent is changing. The chart changes automatically. The thermometer chart changes automatically. Entertainment, maybe Lady Gaga was in town and I needed some tickets. Okay, and everything changes. That thermometer chart, you know what that thermometer chart is? It's just a data bar. It's conditional formatting. Isn't that cool? So very. And these are tables here, right? These are tables. Simple thermometer chart makes something so effective, so visually impactful to show that piece of data. Imagine what you could do with that in a business context, in any context. And it's incredibly simple. It's a single cell with a data bar conditional format in it. Mentioned to you before that I would show you an example of structured references from tables. Notice here under net monthly income and net monthly expenses, these formulas that are all structured references. So if the range of for monthly expenses, right, that's showing you that equals monthly expenses table, totals row, amount, right? Yep. Clicked out of the cell. Can't see the formula if I click out of the cell. Plus semester expenses, totals per month over here. Something to point out about that where you see these totals here, I neglected to mention a feature of table is the totals row. You can add a number of features, banded columns, banded rows. But in a totals row, you automatically by default get a sum in the bottom right cell. You can delete that if you want, but in a totals row in a table, you get a drop-down list in each cell in that row, and you can pick from a number of, I can blow that up so you can see it a little bit better. You can pick from a number of formulas that are preset there, or you can pick from any other function. You can type functions in as well, but you've got just some nice shortcuts there, so that's handy. Okay, so data visualization tools in some practical use, Excel tables in very practical use and making it easier to be flexible and maintain formulas, functions, and basically maintain your data range as a data source. Since we're looking at a chart here, let's go ahead and talk a little about working with charts. Now, what we're going to talk about with charts are applicable to charts that you're working on in Excel, in PowerPoint, or in Word because they are all Excel charts. Okay, so let's go ahead and go back to, we can actually use the same workbook. And I'm going to go ahead and generate a chart from this table. And because it's a table, I don't have to select the data range. Excel knows what data range I want. I'm going to press the F11 key, function F11 key, and I get a chart on its own sheet. Wasn't that hard? That took so long. Really hard to create that chart. Now, not an ideal chart because I included my totals, and I don't want to do that. That's going to throw off my comparison there, right? If I'm looking at my regions over time. Here, I'm going to do that again. If you do not have to go back and manipulate your data range, if you want to remove a series, select the series. I press delete on my keyboard, and it is gone, and the chart updates automatically. What is that? Now, so I'm looking at regions across categories here, right? What if I want to customize the look of this chart a little bit more? I'm personally not a fan of grid lines unless there's a particular reason to have them for the chart type or the particular type of data, and you want to show something off with that. So again, I just selected them and pressed delete. In fact, if I didn't want to show, if I was going to use data labels, perhaps of course you want to show the data in almost any case in a chart, but maybe I didn't want the axis to be there. I was going to use data labels instead. Select it, press delete. It doesn't delete the data information. It just deletes the visual. Of course, it still has a value axis. If this chart didn't have a value axis, you wouldn't see these values. I'll just go ahead and undo that. And I keep using Control-Z to undo. You can always reference the quick access toolbar for undo and redo as well. And okay, so with charts, in fact, if you want to customize charts, there's a number of there's so many ways, of course, to do just about anything in Office, right? One of the greatest things about Office is that you can work the way that you're most comfortable. People say to me, "What's the fastest? What's the fastest way to get to? What's the fastest route to do this?" The fastest route is almost always the one you're most comfortable with. So if you like to use the ribbon, you've got the Chart Tools contextual tabs, Design, Layout, to add or customize any chart element. Formatting, we'll talk about the Chart Tools Format tab in a couple of minutes. Design, where you can get chart styles, which we'll also talk about. Let's say, and here's the thing, let's say that I want to instead, you know what, I want to look at those regions across time. I want to swap my row and column data. Well, that was hard. Very simple. But if I'm going to compare values across time, maybe I actually want this to be a line chart instead. Change chart type, and I get a line chart. Now, with that line chart, if I'm going to use a line chart there, I might want to customize this value axis so I can stretch these out so I can see the comparison a little more clearly and zoom in on what my actual data is, what my actual data is. Well, I'm going to use a method that's one of my favorites, and that's to right-click and Format Axis instead of going to the Chart Tools Layout tab. Get into this dialog box, and I can change that to fix to a minimum that I know is smaller than my lowest data point, maximum that I know is higher than my highest data point, and that's going to let my chart take up more of that plot area, right? Now, a really important thing, if you customize things by default, and you noticed when we created that chart, automatically that chart adjusted. When I deleted a data series, it adjusted. If I had customized this axis, it wouldn't have adjusted in that way because I would have told it what the minimum and maximum value would have been. So it wouldn't have done that automatically for me. So keep in mind, while it can make an enormous difference, and this is, I have to say, my visual that I picked here, not the best example in terms of the difference that an axis change can make, but think about the difference if you have values that are comparative and they're not showing a huge difference. You can make that value range smaller in order to spread your values out wider. That can make a big difference. It can make your chart much more effective. But if you do customize that axis to make your chart more visually impactful, and then you add data that's outside of that range, it's not Excel's fault. If you're going to customize the axis, make sure that you come back and update it when you change your data. Also keep in mind, if you are going to save a chart as a chart template, if you have custom charts that you want to save as a template, it saves all of your settings, including customizations like axis customization, these axis values, minimum and maximum. So if you customize a chart, say customize the axis, save this as a template, and then I want to create a chart that uses all the same settings, but has much different data, like maybe the data is 25,000 to 50,000, it would look like a blank chart. It would look broken. And the only reason is that it saves my custom axis. You just have to go in and fix that. So if you're going to save charts as chart templates for reuse, do keep that in mind. Also, if you're going to save the charts as chart templates, keep in mind that they lose themability when you do, meaning if you use a chart template to create a new chart, and then you change the document theme, their formatting won't update. You need to reapply the chart style before you do. Talking about chart styles, I'm going to actually undo this a little bit and go back to my column chart because it's just a little bit easier to, or maybe just a little prettier, to look at chart style changes. So let's say I customize my chart. And one of the most important time-saving things if I want to customize formatting, particularly for fonts, anything you want to apply, any formatting you want to apply to the entire chart, make sure you selected the chart area. If I'm going to change the font size or color, I don't want to select the legend unless I want it to be different from everything else, right? Because if I select the legend, then I have to select the axis, then I have to select the other axis, data labels, etc. If I select the chart area, Home tab, change the font size, it changes everything inside that range, right? I can change the font color, and it changes everything in that range. But once I make my customizations, if I then decide, oh, you know what, I want to use some formatting from my theme, maybe I want to go ahead and use this gradient and shadow fill. Well, if I apply this style, there goes my customizations, right? My chart, the font size and color that I just applied are gone, for example. Instead, we'll click on that right-click the style. Instead of clicking it, apply and maintain formatting. I get my gradient and shadow without losing any of my customizations. Nice little right-click only shortcut there. Okay, so let's say, and I'm going to go ahead and do that here. Then let's say I want to customize a little bit further. One of the nicest things about the new charting engine, and that was introduced in Office 2007, right? Charts were changed pretty significantly. Not in capabilities. Charting engine is super powerful, very, very flexible. But in terms of the look of charts, they became part of the Office drawing engine. That means you can format charts just like you format shapes or smart art diagrams, right? They're part of Office art. So you have, again, you've got these chart styles, right, that coordinate. These effects come from your document theme. So if you've customized theme effects so that you've got different styles of things like gradients and bevels and shadows and such for shapes, that's also going to appear for your chart options. Well, let's say I want this one series to stand out. Right? And I've made this a little bit monochrome to make that easier. So if I select that one series, Chart Tools Format tab, notice I've got shape styles. These are shapes, drawing objects. And that shape styles gallery gives me the same kind of effects because it's again coming from the theme. So if I make this one series blue, it's got the same gradient and the same shadow automatically. I don't have to do a lot of extra work to get it to match. That's pretty nice. Okay, I mean, there's so much we can talk about with charts. One thing that I want to point out before we move on from charts, before we move on from formatting charts, rather, is that I skipped over a little too quickly. When I went into that Format Access dialog box, I skipped over one of my very favorite features about formatting not just charts, but actually any Office art object. So you can do this in PowerPoint as well, with things, or in Word, PowerPoint, or Excel with formatting smart art or formatting shapes as well. So if I'm formatting the axis and then I want to format a data series, notice I didn't close the dialog box, switch my selection, and go back to it. I just clicked. These are called modeless dialog boxes. You can click back and forth between an Office art dialog box and the object, right? Not all dialog boxes in Office, but for Office art. This is true for all Office art in Excel and PowerPoint, and much of it in Word. And then if I select the other axis, I get another axis. I get the plot area. Notice that the dialog box is changing to give me appropriate options each time. So that's a really nice, handy time-saving shortcut. Okay, so before we move on from charts, let's talk about just one other thing. Talked about, so when I switched my categories, if I'm going to look at that data over time, then perhaps a line chart is more appropriate than a column chart because I don't want to look at isolated categories, but I want to look at trends over time. So a line chart is going to show me connective information. It's going to show me trends. How do you know the best chart for the type of data, right? A column chart looking at values across categories. A line chart looking at trends over time. A pie chart showing contributions to the whole. How do you determine, if you're pretty new to it, it's not something that's obvious to you, how do you determine the best chart for your data? One easy way to get some help with that is on the Insert tab. In the Charts group, if you point to primary chart types, you're going to get a lot of information. This is actually one thing that's a bit unique to Office for Windows. So Office for Mac, you don't get quite as much. You don't get as much description. But if you point to these entries, notice that it's going to tell you when to use this type of chart. Use to emphasize the total across series for one category in a stacked column. Use a clustered column when the order of categories is not important, or for displaying item counts such as a histogram. Okay, so if you go into any category and you're going to see similar information, so that can be extremely helpful. Also important to point out, in the chart dialog box, the Create Chart dialog box, click the dialog launcher in the Charts group, get the Insert Chart dialog box. That, of course, is going to be where you go to access if you want to create a chart based on templates you saved. If you want to create a chart, on its own sheet, you can do that from the Insert group. You can either go into the dialog box to scan through them, or you can go through the categories. But one nice thing is that you can also change your default chart type here. So when I press F11 to create a chart on its own sheet, I get a column chart, a clustered column, because that is the default. But if I more often use pie charts or line charts or anything, select it, click Set as Default. Next time you press F11 to create a new chart, it's going to give you your default. You can reset that at any time. All right. So much we could talk about charts, but we're going to run out of time. And we're getting close to time, and I promised you a quick intro to pivot tables. So let's go ahead and take a quick intro to pivot tables. I love these things. Those very cool things. We right now know that is not a pivot table. That is an Excel table, simple Excel table. And notice the way that this is set up. So this is what I'm looking at in this table. This is a fictional company looking at the cost of management training courses offered to their various managers in different departments, and looking at the cost of training over time, right? So looking at the cost of training, it could be looking at it by person, by department. It could be looking at a number of things. Maybe you want to see how many people attend, how popular these courses are, how many people attended them. You might want to see how much you're spending on training on individual people, or how much you're spending on training in a given time period, right? What you want to do is look at that data in a number of different ways. Now, in one way, you might think of that as you could chart that data. You certainly could, and we'll look at that. What a pivot table does is exactly what it sounds like. A pivot table allows you to pivot data, allows you to look at the same piece of data in a number of different ways, and it's very easy. Let's take a look at one example. So I'm going to go, let's see. So with that data, this pivot table right here, what I'm clicked into here is a pivot table on the left, and that is showing me, so I'm looking at cost, training cost by department, and then individuals broken down under departments, right? So my row labels here, my row labels fields I could have are my categories, right? Just like if I had a bar chart, right, then you would have the row labels going down the vertical axis, you would see the categories, just like row labels. The categories in this case would be the departments, and then subcategories would be the people within those departments. And the values that you're looking at are the cost of training, right? If I had them going this way, then they'd be column labels or a column chart, right? So you would see a horizontal axis, just like we did in the column chart we just looked at, and that might be looking at revenues by region, right? Same exact thing. Cost by department, revenues by region. You're looking at values across categories. A pivot table, in fact, you know what? How much so it's like a column or bar chart? Let's take a look at a pivot chart. This is exactly the same information that we just looked at shown in a chart. So you see your departments, you see your individuals within the department, you see your values, and it looks just like a chart, except notice by default, and you can certainly hide this information, but notice by default you're actually seeing the fields, because this chart is a graphical representation of a pivot table. Quick note about that, anybody who uses Visio, if you've not tried pivot diagrams, a different way to graphically represent pivot tables, pivot data, absolutely fantastic, very, very cool stuff. If you do have my book, there is a bonus chapter that's available in the download that comes with the book that is called the Excel Visio Connection. I believe if I remember my title correctly for that chapter, but it includes a tutorial on how to create pivot diagrams. Extremely cool stuff. Pivot charts, we'll point out for Mac users on this call that pivot charts are one thing that Excel for Mac does not have. The pivot tables in Excel for Mac have improved enormously. In fact, they have a cool exclusive thing, in case that just bummed you out. You get a cool exclusive thing, so easy to create. You can create a basic pivot table in a single click, and that's just Excel for Mac. So, and of course you can still chart data from a pivot table, but pivot charts are a Office for Windows, Excel for Windows exclusive feature right now, and they work exactly like a pivot table. So how does a pivot table work? Let's go ahead and take a look here at how this is created. Notice on the right here, I have the pivot table field list. Also notice, like for many kinds of content, when I'm clicked into my pivot table, I have the pivot table tools design tabs, options and design tabs. I have a lot of the information I need for creating them. I can show my fields and field headers. Same thing, if you're on that pivot chart and you want to be able to hide it, that's where you're going to go. And it'll be pivot chart tools tabs, and you can go ahead and hide that information so it looks like a regular chart. So you can show or hide if you don't see your field list, right? If you don't see that pane, that's the field list pane. It shows you all of the fields. What are all those fields? Those fields are your table header row, right? So when you set up data, when you're setting up, creating a pivot table, it's simple. If you start with an Excel table, you know you're formatted correctly because you need a single row of field headings, your data in columns, and you need a value in every cell unless you intentionally want things to show up as blank, okay? So notice that something is filled in, so Alex is in business development, went to 2 different classes, that information is duplicated in each row where we're talking about Alex, right? So you want to have a value in every cell. When you create the pivot table, or you create a pivot table, we'll do that in just a minute, you get an empty table and you get this list. Notice that it shows you which fields are in use, and then we have 4 categories down here. On the bottom right where you see my mouse pointing, underneath at the bottom of the pivot table field list, you have values, right? Obviously the values that you're going to compare. Row labels and column labels, right? You're comparing, those are your categories. You're going to compare categories in either direction across values. For example, I could move, right? You can move those. Well, that wouldn't be very good, would it? So I can show my categories. Show the categories as columns or rows. You could change the order. If you notice that I'm just dragging to move them around, if you accidentally put them in the wrong order, right, name by business area, that's not really as useful, is it? All I need to do is drag that and it updates. Drag and drop. Very simple. Report filter, if you use pivot tables or have seen pivot tables in much earlier versions, used to be called the page field. So let's say, for example, that I move business area to the report filter. I'm looking at all row labels here. I'm looking at all names, or maybe I move that to columns and we can see that across, right? So see people going across that way. I actually like this particular data as rows better. Or I can filter. By default, it is not enabled to select multiple items. When I was setting up the sample data, I selected that. That's not selected by default, but you can. So if I'm going to just show one at a time, or you can enable that option if it's not enabled and show multiple at a time. Notice that you see that there's a filter. You see that little filter icon. It shows you the table's being filtered by business area. And if I decide then that I want to move that back to row labels, it's going to look the same, but notice it kept my filter until I click on that and go ahead and clear that filter. So very easy to move this data, to manipulate the data. Let's take a look at how easy, very quickly, in just a minute, it is to create a simple one myself. So let's just say I want to take a look at the number of people per class and the cost per class. So I'm going to go to Table Tools Design tab, Summarize with Pivot Table. Notice again I'm in a table. I don't have to select the range, and I'm going to have a structured reference, right, using the table as a data source. And so it's got the table. It would use a range, a named range would do that for me as well, right? But I've got a Excel table. I'm going to create it on a new worksheet. And as mentioned before, you get an empty pivot table. You get your field list. I can click or I can drag. So if I want to look at the course names, and I want to look at the number of attendees, notice that it saw a numeric field, so it gave me a sum by default. And that's wrong for this data because there weren't that many people in this class. So I can go to the field settings and change that to a count of the number of people in that class. If I also want to look at the course cost, again, I can click or drag. When I add that, yes, that I do want to see as a sum, and that's going to be the default. So if you added a qualitative field, it's going to do a count. If it doesn't recognize it as numeric, it'll do a count by default. Otherwise, it does a sum. And you can customize the field settings, such as the formatting. You have pivot table styles, again, coordinate with the theme. Again, you can duplicate them. You can create your own and customize really cool, powerful tools. I'm going to run out of time here, so I'm going to jump out of this. But hopefully that's a quick introduction to show you that they're not the scary things you might have heard. In fact, very cool and very, very cool and powerful tools. And if you do have the book, there is a pivot table primer. You can find instructions, step-by-step guide to creating pivot tables and a lot more information about working with them. quick summary. I'm not going to talk through the summary here because I know we're going to run out of time, but just if there's anything that we talked about today that you want more information about, if you don't have the book and you want additional resources, ask that in a question too. If you have questions that come up after the session today, again, and I'm going to go to some additional resources here. Go to my blog, arouet.net, horribly neglected. Please don't judge me for how infrequently these days I post new content, but I will this weekend, most likely on Sunday. I will post a follow-up post here and give you some links with additional information. And you can also reach out to me there with questions that come up, and you can see a number of additional links here for extra information, additional information on things we talked about. I'll include some links for some very cool Office.com templates, that college budget specifically, and some other cool things they're doing, like calendars that are automated. They'll give you whatever year you want automatically. They don't use any code. There's no programming. They just use formulas and functions. So cool. So I'll show you some of that. I will show you some of that with some links in the follow-up post. In the meantime, I'll turn things back over to Yaz, and hopefully we have time for a couple of questions before we have to go.
All right. Fantastic, Stephanie. We do have just a couple of questions that came in, so we'll go through them pretty quick here. Dan would like to know, how compatible are some of these newer features with VBA? In other words, can they be implemented through code?
Yes. As a matter of fact, one of the things, and this is available on both platforms, 2010 and 2011 that is, there is a Sparklines object model. If there's any other particular features you want to ask about, let me know. But yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The majority of them certainly are. The chart object model is pretty nicely filled out. Sparklines object model is quite cool. You can do an awful lot with it, so definitely feel free to ask about anything specific.
Fantastic. And one other question comes from Dennis. Dennis asks, can I change the default function in a pivot table, making it count for numerical data?
What it's going to do for numerical data by default is it's going to, if it recognizes it as a value, it's going to sum it. If it does not recognize it as a value, then it's going to count it. That is the default. I don't believe you can, and I'm saying it that way because you know what? I think the answer is no, but I got to tell you something. Almost any time I've ever said Excel can't do something, I have been wrong. I will check and confirm that and put the answer in the follow-up post that I post this weekend just to make sure.